Still staring at the unplugged landline on my kitchen counter, I felt the shock land when I realized my own son and daughter-in-law had silenced me. As I wrapped the cord slowly around my fingers, I kept my face calm, refusing to give family the satisfaction of fear. While the dead phone sat between us, the silence thickened, heavier than any argument we'd ever had. The same silence followed my thoughts, as I understood this wasn't protection, it was control wearing a smile. That's when I realized betrayal hurts most when it comes from the people who call it love. Still standing there, I decided justice wouldn't be loud, it would be the moment they lost access to my life. We're about to begin, but if you'd like, share where you're joining from. It reminds me this story doesn't echo into silence, it lands somewhere real. Drop it in the comments, and don't forget to subscribe. Elaine's eyes fluttered open to the quiet hum of a snowy morning outside her window. The soft light of the early hours filtered through the blinds, casting a calm glow across her room. But something was wrong. Something felt off. She reached instinctively for her phone, which she always kept on the nightstand beside her bed. Her fingers brushed the cool surface of the wood, and then the familiar weight she relied on to start her day was absent. The charger still sat plugged into the wall, but the phone itself was gone. She sat up slowly, blinking, her mind trying to catch up with her senses. She hadn't gone to bed late. There was no reason for the phone to be anywhere other than where it had been when she drifted off. Frowning, she swept a hand over the nightstand, feeling for the missing device as if it might have slipped down the side. Nothing. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts, sharp and impersonal. She knew it was them before they even spoke. "Mom, we're here!" Kevin's voice boomed from the other side. No warmth, no real greeting, just that insistent, authoritative tone. "We've got groceries." Brooke's voice followed, a little too chirpy. "And we've got your help too. Time to make things easier on you." Elaine sighed, swinging her legs over the side of the bed. She wasn't ready for this, not today, not now. But she had no choice. She straightened her housecoat and shuffled to the door. The moment she opened it, they pushed inside. Kevin was carrying bags of food, too many for one person, and none of it was anything she would have asked for. Things she couldn't eat anymore. Pre-packaged meals. Frozen dinners. Brooke followed him, her smile too wide to be genuine, like a mask. It made Elaine's stomach tighten. "You're going to love these," Brooke said, setting a bag of bright orange processed snacks on the counter. "We're simplifying your life, Mom. Less stress, more peace." Elaine didn't respond. She couldn't. Not when she could feel her irritation bubbling just beneath the surface. She was trying to keep calm, but it was becoming harder every time they barged in like this, claiming to help while stealing her space. Kevin caught her glance and nodded. "I'll set the phone up for you later. It's safe. You don't need to worry about that." The words fell flat. Elaine wanted to protest, to demand her phone back right then and there, but something held her back. Instead, she just stared at him, her fingers flexing against the counter. She didn't say a word as he began unpacking the groceries, his back turned to her. Brooke was already rearranging things, stacking jars in a way that made Elaine's kitchen feel more like a store than a home. "We're making sure you don't get too overwhelmed, Mom. You'll see this is what's best for you. You don't need all those distractions." Elaine swallowed. Her throat felt tight. She reached for the coffee pot, keeping her hands steady. "Where's my phone?" Kevin glanced over at her, smiling like he was indulging a child. "It's safe, Mom, you don't need to worry." He said it so casually, so convincingly. But something in his eyes made her uneasy. He didn't look at her like a son anymore. It was as if she were something to be managed, not someone to be respected. The knot in her stomach tightened. Safe. She wasn't sure she believed him. She went to the phone charger, expecting to see it still plugged in, ready for when she'd charge it later. But the charger was still there, empty. Her hand hovered over the cord for a moment, and her heart gave a small, anxious thump. There was no phone. When the silence dragged on too long, Kevin cleared his throat and clapped his hands together. "All right, Mom, we'll head out soon, but we just wanted to make sure you're all set for the day. We're looking after everything." Brooke looked around the room, her eyes scanning the space like she was checking for something that hadn't been done yet. "Remember," she said brightly, You don't need friends stirring you up. They're not the ones looking after you. Elaine didn't respond. She didn't have to. The sting of those words settled inside her chest like an unwanted stone. She turned back to the counter, pretending to fiddle with a jar. But in her mind, she was already spinning. Friends? Why were they so set on erasing everyone from her life? She barely noticed the time passing until she saw a flash of movement from the corner of her eye. The landline. It was unplugged, sitting behind the cabinet, its cord coiled like a serpent. She hadn't touched it, hadn't needed it. But she knew, deep in her gut, what it meant. Elaine's pulse quickened as she stood frozen, staring at the phone line now cut off from its purpose. That was the last piece. Her phone was gone. The landline was disconnected. Her independence was slipping through her fingers. Her children were locking her in. No one had asked her. No one had even warned her. Elaine, are you all right? Brooke's voice sliced through the quiet, and Elaine blinked, pulling herself back to the present. Fine, she said softly, though nothing about her was fine. But in that moment, Elaine knew. This wasn't just about simplifying her life. This wasn't about care. This was control, and she was done pretending it wasn't. She locked eyes with Kevin, her heart beating harder now. She didn't know what she would do next, but she knew one thing for sure. This was just the beginning. Elaine stood frozen in the kitchen, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sticky note on the door. No visitors today, Mom resting Brooke's handwriting. Sharp and final. It felt like a command, not a request. The idea that she wasn't allowed to see anyone, to talk to anyone, pressed down on her chest like a weight. A cold draft slipped through the edges of the door as Kevin entered from the hallway, holding a deadbolt in his hand. His face was unreadable, as if this were just another task on a to-do list, something that needed to be done without question. Just securing the place, Mom. You'll thank me later, Kevin said, his voice smooth, convincing. Elaine didn't say anything. What was there to say? It wasn't about security. It never had been. It was about control. She could feel it in the air, thick and suffocating. She turned her attention away from him, stepping into the living room, hoping to find some peace in her quiet corner. But Brooke's voice cut through the air, like a sharp blade. I've made some changes to your calendar, Brooke called out from the kitchen. Elaine felt a tightness in her chest as she moved toward her calendar hanging on the wall. There, in the familiar, neat rows, were appointments she hadn't scheduled, doctor visits, tests, things she hadn't asked for. Her lunches with friends were crossed out. The senior center bingo nights were gone. Brooke, what is this? Elaine's voice came out before she could stop it, the frustration clear in her tone. Brooke looked up from her phone, her expression neutral. We're just simplifying things, Mom. You don't need to be running all over the place anymore. The doctor's appointments are for your health. Elaine swallowed hard, holding her ground. What about bingo? What about my friends? Brooke didn't meet her eyes. It's canceled. Too much gossip. You don't need that. Elaine's heart sank. She didn't care about gossip. She cared about her life, her connections. The only people she had left were being erased from her days, one small detail at a time. Kevin appeared at the doorway, a look of finality in his eyes. This is for your own good, Mom. You're not getting any younger. We're just trying to help. But Elaine felt the walls closing in. She couldn't even talk to Rosa, couldn't visit the senior center, couldn't even have a phone call without interference. She turned and headed for the TV remote, desperate for some sign of normalcy. When she flicked it on, the familiar channel for her church's live stream was missing. A sharp pang of panic gripped her chest. It was gone, replaced by a void. Everything was slipping away. The weight of it all settled on her as she walked to her purse, her fingers moving quickly. She was looking for something, anything to hold on to her bus card, her link to freedom, her small daily escape, but it wasn't there. Her breath caught. She couldn't escape. Not with her phone gone, not with the door locked. She faced the window, the cold air creeping in from the cracks in the frame. They had taken everything, her phone, her independence, her connections, and now they were taking even the smallest freedoms she had left. Enough, she thought, her resolve hardening. It was time to fight back. Elaine stood at the window, her fingers still clenched around the cool glass as she watched Kevin and Brooke leave, their car pulling out of the driveway with the same determined indifference they had entered with. The house was quiet again, but the silence felt different now, thick, almost suffocating. She waited a moment longer, just to be sure. When the sound of their engine faded, she turned toward the kitchen. Her mind was sharp, despite the unsettling dread that still clung to her bones. I need to find my phone, she thought. I need to know what they've done. The house felt foreign as she moved through it. The air was stale, every step on the hardwood floor echoing louder than it should. The phone had to be somewhere she could get to it before they came back. She walked into the kitchen, her eyes scanning every surface with frantic precision. It wasn't on the counter, not in the drawers, not on the table where she usually left it. Her heart picked up its pace. Then, a glint of metal caught her eye. A canister on the shelf, one she hadn't seen in ages. She moved toward it, her pulse thumping in her throat, and pulled it down. There, nestled inside the flower, was her phone. It felt absurd to see it there, like a cruel joke. She pulled it out, and her fingers shook as she slid the back open. The SIM card was gone. Dead. Just like everything else in her life right now? Her mind reeled, but she forced herself to steady her breath. There was no time to panic. There was no time to scream. She had to act, and she had to act fast. She looked around the kitchen, her eyes settling on the notepad by the fridge. Rosa, she thought, her friend, the only one who still saw her for who she was, not a burden to be managed. She could help. Elaine grabbed a pen and wrote quickly, her handwriting steady even as her heart raced. Need help. Not safe. Please come. It was simple. It had to be. She wasn't sure how much time she had before Kevin and Brooke returned, but she couldn't afford to waste another second. With the note folded tightly in her hand, Elaine made her way to the front door. She hesitated for just a moment, her hand resting on the doorknob. Then, taking a deep breath, she slid the note under the doormat, making sure it was perfectly visible to anyone who might come by. Rosa had always checked beneath it when she visited. Please check, Elaine thought, silently willing her friend to understand. She stepped back and closed the door softly behind her, the house suddenly feeling smaller, colder. The minutes stretched into what felt like hours. Elaine sat at the kitchen table, her fingers drumming lightly on the surface, trying to keep her mind calm. The walls felt like they were closing in, but she focused on keeping herself steady, reminding herself that Rosa would come. She drank water slowly, watching the clock tick with a kind of eerie patience, as if time itself had become a force she couldn't control. Each second passed like a grain of sand slipping through an hourglass, fragile, unrelenting. The dusk settled in, casting long shadows across the room. The house felt quieter now, the light outside fading, and Elaine tried to keep her thoughts clear. She couldn't let herself think of the worst possible scenario. Not yet. Not until she knew for sure if Rosa had seen the note. Then, just as the silence seemed to grow unbearable, she heard a faint tapping on the door. 3 sharp knocks, in perfect rhythm. Elaine's heart leapt, and her breath caught in her throat. Rosa. She rushed to the door, her pulse racing, and pulled it open with shaking hands. There, standing in the dim light of the hallway, was her best friend. Rosa's face was calm, determined, but her eyes showed the wear of someone who had seen too much. Elaine, Rosa said softly, her voice barely more than a whisper. I'm here. And for the first time in what felt like days, Elaine allowed herself to breathe. Elaine sat at the kitchen table, the weight of the small prepaid phone in her hand grounding her in the moment. Rosa had just left to make the call to Jordan, and Elaine's heart was pounding in her chest. It was hard to believe that the next steps, whatever they were happening now. After days of feeling trapped, isolated, this small gesture of hope felt like a lifeline. The phone hummed in her palm, its cheap plastic casing cool against her skin. It's not much, she thought, but it was a start. A way to speak for herself again. She glanced toward the window, the fading light outside casting long shadows across the room. The silence of the house was oppressive, suffocating in its stillness. The minutes seemed to stretch endlessly. The clock on the wall ticked too loudly, each second dragging on, as if the world outside had slowed down, waiting for her to act. Elaine forced herself to take deep breaths, steadying her nerves. Focus, she told herself. The plan was simple. Document everything. Make sure everything was in place before they came back, before Kevin and Brooke returned to finish what they had started. She stood up, moving toward the drawer where she kept her camera. With shaking hands, she began snapping pictures first, the sticky note on the door, the one that had pinned her inside. The words, written so casually, "No visitors today, Mom resting," had made her skin crawl when she first saw them. Now, it was a mark of their control, their determination to erase her life. Next, she turned her attention to the receipt for the new deadbolt lock Kevin had installed. She snapped a shot of that, too, the paper crinkling slightly under her fingers. Proof, she thought. Evidence. She moved to the landline, the one they had unplugged and hidden behind the cabinet. The absence of it felt like a punch in the gut. But she photographed that as well, making sure the details were clear, every piece of the puzzle. The weight of the evidence, the photographs in her phone, felt empowering. This was her story. This was her fight. Just then, the sound of a car engine rumbled outside. Her heart skipped in her chest. Too soon. She turned to the window, her breath catching as she saw the familiar car pulling back into the driveway. Kevin and Brooke were back. Elaine's grip tightened on the phone. Her stomach twisted with fear, but the fear was now mixed with something else, a cold, determined resolve. She wasn't going to let them trap her again. With the evidence in hand, she stepped toward the front door. As she peeked through the window, watching Kevin and Brooke approach the house, she whispered to herself, not this time. She wasn't going to play by their rules anymore. They could try to shut her down, but she was fighting back now. Elaine tried to keep her face calm, but inside, her thoughts were racing. Kevin and Brooke had just walked into the room, announcing their good news. They had scheduled an appointment for her, a meeting to update her documents. Good news? Elaine repeated, her voice steady but her stomach churning. What documents? Brooke flashed a tight smile. Just some medical and financial stuff, Mom. It'll make things easier for you. Elaine's heart sank. It was all so thinly veiled, helping her by stripping away her autonomy. She forced herself to nod, pretending agreement, as if she were simply going along with the plan. But in her mind, she was already calculating her next move. They're trying to trap me. Kevin, oblivious to the storm brewing in her mind, beamed at her. It's all arranged. We're going to a notary's office tomorrow to get everything signed. A friend of mine runs it, so it'll be official. Elaine's blood ran cold. A notary. Of course. It was a familiar setup. She could see it now, the notary, the documents, her signature on papers she wouldn't fully understand. No one had asked her. No one had given her the choice. They were going to take everything from her, and she wouldn't even have the ability to stop it. She kept her face neutral, turning her gaze to the notepad on the kitchen counter. As if on cue, Rose's voice crackled through her old phone. Elaine, I spoke to Jordan. I heard about the meeting tomorrow. It's at Kevin's friend's office, right? Elaine's heart skipped. Jordan Pike. The elder law attorney Rosa had reached out to. He had been her lifeline, and now, it seemed like he was finally ready to act. That's right, Elaine whispered back, trying to hide her growing panic. What should I do? You need to revoke any power of attorney immediately. Jordan's drafting an emergency revocation as we speak. He's also preparing a new POA with a neutral trustee. They've been setting you up for too long. Elaine's hands shook, but she didn't let them see. Her chest tightened, but she forced herself to remain calm. This is it. This is the moment. She quickly hid the prepaid phone in her robe pocket, out of sight from Kevin and Brooke. She needed the evidence to be hidden. If they found the phone now, it would be over. With a cold resolve, she turned back toward them. I'm not signing anything tomorrow, Elaine said firmly, her voice steady despite the dread creeping up her spine. Kevin paused, his smile faltering for the first time. What do you mean? It's just a formality. No, Elaine said, shaking her head. I'm done with your help. I know exactly what you're trying to do, and I won't be part of it." Kevin's eyes darkened, but he said nothing. Brooke stepped closer, but Elaine held her ground. "I'm not signing," she repeated, the words stronger now, filled with the weight of all the days of isolation, control, and manipulation. As they exchanged silent, loaded looks, Elaine knew this was just the beginning. They would try again, but this time, she was prepared, and she wasn't going down without a fight. Elaine had barely closed the door behind Kevin and Brooke when she heard the sound of a car pulling up to the house. Her heart raced, knowing the police were about to arrive. She had done everything she could to prepare for this moment, but the truth was, nothing had ever felt as real as the arrival of Officer Harris. This was no longer just a fight for control, it was the beginning of a reckoning. She had been calm when she'd spoken to Jordan and Rosa, steeling herself for what came next, but now, with the weight of everything pressing in, she felt a strange mix of fear and hope. Fear because she didn't know what Kevin and Brooke might try to do next, and hope because, for the first time, she wasn't alone. The knock at the door was firm, deliberate, exactly how she imagined a police officer would announce themselves. She took a breath and opened it, finding Officer Harris standing on the doorstep. His uniform was neat, his demeanor professional but not cold. He didn't immediately enter, just stood there, taking in the sight of her. "Elaine Foster?" he asked, his voice calm but firm. "Yes," she replied, holding her ground. "That's me. I'm Officer Len Harris. I'm here for a welfare check." He glanced behind her, his eyes lingering on Kevin and Brooke, who had followed her to the door. Kevin stepped forward, a little too eagerly. "We called you for this, officer. We're just looking after Mom, making sure she's okay." Officer Harris raised a hand, halting Kevin's forward motion. "I'll need to speak with Elaine alone." Brooke's eyes flashed with annoyance, but Kevin, sensing something, stepped back reluctantly, giving Elaine a chance to breathe. She could feel their eyes on her, watching, waiting for her to falter. But this time, she didn't. Harris entered the house, his boots quiet on the floor as he surveyed the space, his gaze flicking to the various corners of the room. Elaine gestured to the kitchen, where she had been gathering the evidence. She sat down at the table, and Harris took the seat opposite her. His posture was relaxed, but he gave off the impression that he wasn't rushing through anything. He was here for the truth. "I understand you've asked for this welfare check, Elaine," Officer Harris said, his voice steady. "Can you tell me what's going on?" Elaine took a slow, deliberate breath. "My phone was taken. My landline was unplugged and hidden. I'm being pressured to sign documents I don't understand. Documents I never asked for." Officer Harris nodded, his pen already in hand, ready to take notes. "And how long has this been going on?" "A few weeks now," she replied, her voice steady but edged with the strain of everything she'd been through. "They've been isolating me, limiting who I can talk to, blocking my access to everything friends, the senior center, even the church live stream I rely on." Harris jotted down some notes before meeting her gaze again. "Elaine, do you feel safe living here with them, managing your access to everything?" Elaine hesitated, but only for a moment. She already knew the answer. "No," she said firmly, her eyes locking with his. "Not with them managing my access. They're controlling everything. My life, my choices." Brooke, who had been standing quietly by the door, suddenly let out a short, nervous laugh. "She's being dramatic, officer. She's always been a bit of a drama queen." Harris didn't react to her attempt to undermine Elaine's words. His gaze remained focused on Elaine, unwavering. "Elder isolation is something we take seriously," he said, his voice even. "This is something that's reportable. If you feel that you're being kept from making decisions for yourself, if you feel unsafe, you have the right to get help." Elaine's heart skipped a beat. For the first time in what felt like forever, she wasn't alone in this fight. "You can help?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. Officer Harris nodded, pulling a small card from his pocket and placing it gently on the table in front of her. "This is a direct line to the Adult Protection Services and the non-emergency police contacts. If you feel like you're being pressured, if you need to report any further incidents, you can call them." Elaine's hands shook as she picked up the card, feeling the weight of it in her palm. For the first time in weeks, she felt like there was a way out. They can't keep me trapped forever. Kevin's face tightened, the lines around his eyes hardening as he realized that things were changing, that there were now witnesses to what had been happening. He had assumed the police would simply back his narrative, but now it was clear that his grip on the situation was slipping. Harris stood up, his eyes moving from Elaine to Kevin and Brooke. "I'll need to follow up with you soon, Elaine. Make sure everything is taken care of." As he turned to leave, Elaine felt a flicker of something new, hope, perhaps. Hope that this wasn't the end, but a turning point. She wasn't alone anymore, and for the first time, she wasn't afraid to stand her ground. She watched Officer Harris walk out of the house, the door closing softly behind him. But as she did, she knew the real battle was just beginning. Kevin and Brooke wouldn't give up easily, but neither would she. The morning air was sharp, a cool reminder that nothing about today was going to be easy. Elaine stood at the window, watching as the first light of dawn painted the sky in soft shades of pink and gold. Her fingers lingered on the cold glass, still feeling the weight of everything that had happened in the past few days, the phone being taken, the landline unplugged, the pressure to sign things she didn't understand. She had to fight back, and she had already made the first move. Rosa was here now, a quiet strength at her side. She could see her friend's calm face in the reflection of the window. Rosa's unwavering support had given Elaine something to hold on to when everything else felt out of control. They were heading to the senior center today, the place where Elaine had always felt heard, where she belonged. Rosa had insisted on escorting her before Kevin could drive her anywhere, before they could isolate her again. The car ride was silent but comforting. Elaine was careful to keep her expression neutral, though inside, her pulse quickened. She was finally taking back some of her life. And yet, it felt like walking on a tightrope, every step measured. She had no idea how Kevin and Brooke would react to her refusal to comply, but she knew they wouldn't go down without a fight. When they arrived at the senior center, the familiar hum of activity filled the air. The place was a sanctuary, full of people who understood what it meant to be seen, to have a voice. Jordan Pike was waiting for them, his usual sharp focus replaced by a quiet resolve as he handed Elaine a set of documents. "Elaine, I've prepared the new power of attorney and healthcare directive for you," he said, his voice low but firm. "These documents will give you the control you've been fighting for. The new POA names a neutral trustee, and I've included a no-access notice for Kevin and Brooke. They won't be able to make decisions for you anymore." Elaine held the papers in her hands, the weight of them heavier than she expected. She sat down at the table with Rosa beside her and Jordan standing close, a steady presence. Her fingers moved to the pen, but for the first time in weeks, her hand was steady. She wasn't rushing. She wasn't scared. She was taking back control, one signature at a time. With a firm, deliberate motion, Elaine signed the papers, the ink flowing smoothly across the page. It felt final. This was the moment when her life was truly her own again. Jordan glanced at her after she signed. "Elaine, I need you to list your trusted contacts now, the people who can support you." Elaine's hand didn't hesitate as she wrote down names she knew were real, people who had always stood by her. Rosa was at the top of the list, followed by two longtime friends from the senior center, people who had known her long enough to understand her needs, her life, her history. As she handed the papers back to Jordan, the phone in her purse buzzed, her heart skipped. She didn't need to check the number, she knew exactly who it was. Kevin's voicemail blared through the speaker. "Elaine, I told you. Rosa is a bad influence. She's poisoning your mind and you're going to regret this. We're just trying to help you and you're letting her turn you against us. You'll see." Elaine's grip on the phone tightened. The message was clear. Kevin was trying to manipulate her again, but now it was all out in the open. He couldn't hide behind false concern anymore. His words were desperate, but they proved what Elaine had known all along. They weren't trying to help her. They were trying to control her. She looked up at Rosa, who gave her a small, encouraging smile. "This is what happens when they realize they can't control you anymore," Rosa said quietly. Elaine nodded. The phone call was a reminder of everything that had led her to this point, every attempt to silence her, every time they had tried to shut her out from the world. But now, she wasn't going to be silenced. Jordan's phone buzzed, and he glanced at it quickly. "That's APS," he said, looking at Elaine with a steady, reassuring gaze. "They'll be calling you soon to schedule an interview. We'll make sure everything is in place for you, Elaine." Elaine felt a small knot in her chest loosen. For the first time in a long while, things were moving forward, not backward. She wasn't sure what the future held, but at least she was no longer fighting alone. As she stood up from the table, ready to face whatever came next, the door to the senior center opened. Officer Harris stepped inside, his presence commanding yet unthreatening. He nodded at her, a brief but silent acknowledgement that things had changed for good. Elaine wasn't just surviving anymore. She was finally living, and she wasn't going back to the life they had tried to force on her. Elaine sat at the desk, her hands steady but her heart racing as the banker processed the last of the changes. The credit union had been a sanctuary. A place where the tight grip Kevin and Brooke had held over her for so long was finally starting to loosen. She wasn't just taking back control of her finances, she was reclaiming her life. Jordan stood quietly beside her, his calm presence a silent reminder that she wasn't facing this alone. The paperwork was nearly finished. The new accounts were set up, the alerts in place, and the fraud protections locked in. She wasn't the victim anymore. She was the one making the decisions. "Your accounts are now secure," the banker said, offering a warm smile. "You've done everything right." Elaine nodded, the weight of the moment sinking in. For the first time in weeks, she felt like she could breathe. She stood up to leave, her legs a little shaky from the weight of the changes. But she didn't waver. As she turned toward the door, the banker's voice stopped her. "One more thing," she said, her expression faltering. "We've got a note in the system here. Brooke Foster, she ordered a replacement debit card last week. It's scheduled to be mailed out today." Elaine froze, her blood running cold. Brooke. Even as she was making strides to protect herself, they were already plotting their next move. Jordan's jaw tightened at the mention of Brooke's name. He stepped forward, his tone firm. "Stop it! Cancel the card! Now!" The banker didn't hesitate, fingers flying over the keys as she entered the command. Elaine could feel the weight of the moment, the danger they were still in. Even with everything she had done to regain control, Kevin and Brooke's influence didn't just disappear, they would keep pushing, finding new ways to manipulate. After a few moments, the banker nodded. "It's done. The replacement card has been canceled." Elaine let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding. The immediate threat had been deflected. For now, at least. She turned to Jordan, her voice low but resolute. "They won't stop, will they?" "No," Jordan replied, his gaze steady. "But neither will you." Elaine smiled faintly, a sense of calm settling over her. She wasn't alone anymore, and she wasn't backing down. Every piece of control they had taken from her, she was now taking back. And with Jordan, Rosa, and the police backing her, Elaine knew this fight was far from over, but it was one she was ready for. As they walked out of the bank, the cold air greeted them, sharp and invigorating. For the first time in a long time, Elaine felt like the world was finally hers again. Elaine sat at the kitchen table, her fingers curled tightly around the papers Jordan had prepared. She had just received the call from the bank confirming the flagged transfer, an unauthorized movement of her own funds. The relief she felt from their intervention was short-lived. The magnitude of what had been attempted hit her again. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the power they had tried to steal from her. She stood, her legs a little unsteady, but the feeling of control was intoxicating. The bank had done its part, but it wasn't enough. Kevin and Brooke wouldn't stop. They would find new ways to push her into the corner, to make her believe she was weak, helpless. But today had proven something. She wasn't. She had fought back, and she would keep fighting. Just then the doorbell rang. A sharp knock followed. Elaine froze for a moment. It was too soon. The tension that had built over the past few days came crashing down in a flood of nerves. She knew who it was before she even opened the door. Officer Harris was standing there, his presence calm but solid. He had been a quiet ally throughout this entire ordeal, never doubting her, even when everything else felt uncertain. "I'm here to take the supplemental report," he said, stepping inside as though he were expected. He didn't ask for permission, he was already here, part of the process. Elaine led him to the living room where everything was laid out. The evidence, the documents, the photos, and even the sticky note that had been left on her door. Every detail mattered now. The weight of each paper felt heavier than ever, a reflection of the months of control she had endured. She sat down as Harris flipped through the paperwork. His pen moved steadily over each page, noting the obvious phone line unplugged, contacts blocked, the pressure to sign documents she didn't understand, the hidden phone in the flour canister. "The pattern is clear," Officer Harris said, looking up. His eyes were steady, as if he were stating a simple fact. Elder isolation, coercion, financial interference. The transfer was just the final piece. Elaine nodded, her heart thudding in her chest. Everything was coming into focus. She wasn't just a victim anymore. She was part of something larger now. She wasn't alone. As Officer Harris stood to leave, the phone rang. Elaine picked it up, her pulse quickening. She already knew who it was. Kevin's voice came through, tight with fury. "You called the police on your own kids?" His words were sharp, biting. "How could you do that?" Elaine's hand tightened around the phone. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. "You took my phone like I was 12, Kevin. You controlled everything. I had no choice." There was a long pause, and then his voice came again, desperate. "You'll regret this." Elaine didn't flinch. "I've had enough of regret." She hung up the phone, the silence ringing in her ears. Officer Harris nodded at her as he left, his quiet support echoing in the stillness of the room. This was far from over, but for the first time, Elaine felt like she was finally fighting on her terms, and she wasn't about to stop. Elaine sat at her kitchen table, the phone buzzing in her hand. She had just seen Brooke's latest post on social media. Cognitive decline is a serious issue in the elderly, a thinly veiled attempt to paint her as incapable, fragile. It wasn't outright false, but it was a deliberate manipulation. Elaine had always been sharp, in control, but Brooke's narrative aimed to strip her of that power. Elaine didn't comment. She refused to give in to the bait. Instead, she texted Jordan, her fingers trembling slightly. "Brooke's posting again. She's implying I'm losing my mind. We need a strategy." Jordan replied within moments. "Don't engage. We'll prepare a formal response. Let the evidence speak for itself. They can't hide behind lies anymore." Rosa was already working behind the scenes, rallying friends from the senior center and church to testify on Elaine's behalf. They remembered her sharp mind, her independent spirit. They knew the truth. Meanwhile, Adult Protection Services began reaching out to Kevin and Brooke for interviews. But strangely, Kevin and Brooke, usually so eager to control the narrative, suddenly became too busy to respond. Calls went unanswered. The pressure was mounting, and they had nowhere left to hide. Elaine's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a message from Mia, Brooke's daughter. Elaine hesitated but opened it. "Mom's lying. She hid your phone. She's telling everyone you're losing your mind. I didn't know what to do, but I can't keep this from you anymore." Elaine's heart dropped. Mia, caught in the middle, had witnessed it all. She had seen through the lies. Elaine felt a rush of gratitude, but also a pang of sadness for Mia, for the web of manipulation she had been tangled in. Elaine replied with a quiet strength, "Thank you for being honest. Stay safe. I'm here if you need to talk." As she put the phone down, she felt a flicker of hope. The truth was slipping through their fingers, no matter how tightly they tried to hold on. Just then, the doorbell rang. Elaine's pulse quickened. She opened the door and found no one but a small package addressed to her. No return address. She opened it carefully, her fingers trembling. Inside were legal documents. Her breath caught. The battle wasn't over. Elaine sat in the doctor's office, the sterile smell of antiseptic heavy in the air. She had been here before, of course, but today it felt different. Today was the day she would prove she was still in control. For months, Kevin and Brooke had tried to make her feel fragile, incapable. Today, she would show them they were wrong. The doctor, a middle-aged woman with a calm but detached demeanor, guided her through a series of questions. Some about her daily routine, some about current events. Nothing felt out of place. Nothing felt like a test. Elaine's mind was sharp, clear. She answered with confidence, each response more solid than the last. When the evaluation ended, the doctor glanced at her notes. "You're fully competent. Elaine," she said, her voice matter-of-fact. "No signs of cognitive impairment. Your judgment is intact." Elaine felt the relief flood her chest, though she had expected this. Still, hearing it from a professional made it final. She wasn't crazy. She wasn't losing control. She was still her. She walked out of the office with the doctor's statement in hand, her steps lighter than they had been in weeks. At home, she handed the statement to Jordan. He read it, then gave her a reassuring smile. "This is everything we need. Now, we have the medical confirmation, the APS report, and the bank's documentation. We're closing in." Elaine nodded, but a heavy silence lingered. The pressure in the neighborhood hadn't faded. The whispers were still there, people could feel the tension, and Kevin and Brooke's control was harder to shake than she'd anticipated. The doorbell rang. Elaine knew who it was. Kevin. She opened the door, keeping it cracked, her voice steady. "What do you want?" "We need to talk," Kevin said, his expression soft but persistent. "Let's sort this out, Mom." Elaine shook her head, unwavering. "No. The only thing I'm signing is you out of my access list." Kevin's face tightened, but he didn't argue. There was nothing more to say. Elaine closed the door, the weight of her decision settling over her. This time there was no going back. She was done pretending, and she wasn't alone anymore. The courtroom was silent, except for the quiet rustle of paper as Jordan handed over the last of the evidence. Elaine sat at the table beside him, her fingers clasped tightly in her lap, her heart steady but her mind racing. This was it. After months of living under the cloud of Kevin and Brooke's control, the culmination of all her fighting was now in someone else's hands. The judge, a woman with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor, leaned over the desk. She flipped through the folder of documents. Police welfare check notes, the APS findings, bank records showing the attempted unauthorized transfer, and screenshots of Brooke's online posts insinuating Elaine's decline. Everything was laid bare: Kevin and Brooke's coercion, their isolation of her, the control they had tried to exert over her life. Elaine took a deep breath. She hadn't expected it to feel so final. It wasn't just about the documents. It was about the years of feeling trapped, of seeing her life pulled out of her hands. But now, it was all in the open. The truth was undeniable. After a long pause, the judge looked up. "Based on the evidence presented and the testimony of Adult Protective Services, I am granting the protective order against harassment and coercive control. This will restrict Kevin and Brooke Foster from interfering with your communications, finances, or access to you in any way." Elaine's chest tightened with a mixture of relief and disbelief. It was over. They couldn't control her anymore. The judge gave a nod, then turned to Jordan, who had been her quiet advocate throughout the process. He gave her a small, approving smile, but his eyes were sharp with the understanding of what this meant. The fight wasn't over, not by a long shot. But this was a victory. Later that afternoon, Elaine and Rosa stood in front of her front door, the sunlight casting long shadows over the porch. The new lock had already been installed, and now they were setting up the door camera, a simple device, but it gave Elaine a sense of security that had been missing for so long. "This is for you, Elaine," Rosa said softly, her voice thick with unshed emotion. "No one should have the power to take away your safety, your peace." Elaine nodded, the weight of it all sinking in. For the first time in what felt like forever, she was in control of her own space. Her hands moved quickly as she attached the camera to the wall, testing the angles, making sure it covered every corner. It was a small thing, but it was hers. Just then, there was a soft knock at the door. Elaine's heart skipped, but she didn't hesitate as she opened it. Mia stood there, her eyes wet with unshed tears. She was smaller than Elaine remembered, more fragile than she had been when she last saw her. There was no bravado now, no defiance, just a quiet, steady sorrow. "I'm sorry," Mia said softly, her voice trembling. "I didn't know how to stand up to her. I should have said something sooner." Elaine's heart twisted as she stepped aside, allowing Mia to come in. She could see the pain in her eyes, the confusion, the betrayal, but there was something else too. Relief. Mia had been trapped, just like Elaine had, caught in the web of Brooke's lies. "Mia," Elaine said softly, leading her to the couch. "You're allowed to love people and still refuse their control. You don't have to carry the weight of their choices on your shoulders." Mia looked up at her, her expression a mixture of guilt and gratitude. "But how do I move forward? How do I fix this?" Elaine smiled, a gentle, tired smile. "You don't have to fix it. You just have to choose to live without the weight of it. It's not about them anymore. It's about you." The silence between them felt different now. Not heavy with regret, but soft with possibility. Mia reached out, taking Elaine's hand in hers. And for the first time, the burden of the past felt just a little lighter. As the day stretched into evening, the house felt quieter, more peaceful than it had in years. Elaine moved through her home, placing little touches of ownership on every corner. It wasn't just about the locks or the camera, it was about reclaiming what had been taken from her. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, Elaine was fighting on her own terms, and she wasn't backing down. The morning sun filtered through the curtains, casting soft light over the kitchen table where Elaine sat, pen in hand. The air was still, as if even the house itself understood the weight of the moment. She had been preparing for this no, planning for it for weeks. It was time to make sure that no matter what Kevin and Brooke tried next, they could never control her again. The document in front of her was more than just a legal form. It was a statement of power, a statement of defiance. The revised trust, carefully crafted by Jordan, was the final step in reclaiming everything they had stolen from her. Elaine took a deep breath and signed her name with steady precision, her pen gliding across the page. She felt the weight of her decision settle on her shoulders, but for the first time in years, it felt right. She wasn't just securing her future, she was securing Mia's future, too. Jordan stood beside her, watching with quiet approval. He had been with her through every step of this fight, a steady anchor in the storm. He nodded as she finished signing, his eyes scanning the document one last time to ensure everything was in order. "It's done," he said softly, placing his hand on the table. "The trust is finalized. Kevin and Brooke are no longer beneficiaries. Mia's education and housing fund is set, and there's a neutral trustee in place to protect it. And the no contest clause ensures they can't challenge your decision without risking everything." Elaine felt a rush of relief wash over her, tempered by the quiet satisfaction of finally taking control. She had been so close to losing everything, but now, it was secure. She reached for the final piece of the trust, the factual record statement. It was simple, clear, and unambiguous. Removed due to documented coercion and isolation. Elaine signed it with finality. There would be no mistaking her reasons. No one would be able to twist the truth this time. Jordan filed the changes immediately, updating beneficiary designations on every account. She knew the battle wasn't over, that Kevin and Brooke would fight this with everything they had left, but she had taken away their greatest weapon. They couldn't control her money. They couldn't control her life. "Thank you," Elaine said quietly, looking up at Jordan. "For everything." He smiled, his expression soft but resolute. "You did this, Elaine. I just helped you make sure it was done right." Later that day, Rosa arrived, her presence a comfort, a reminder of the quiet support she had always offered. She had witnessed Elaine's transformation, her rise from the shadows of fear and manipulation. Now, she was here to witness something else, Elaine's final act of independence. Rosa stood beside Elaine as she signed the documents, not as a spectator, but as a friend. She didn't make a big show of it. She didn't need to. She understood the significance of the moment. She knew that this wasn't just about the will, it was about the control Elaine had fought for and won back. Elaine paused for a moment, looking at the papers, then at Rosa. "I'm donating a portion of this to the Senior Center's Connected Elders program," she said, her voice steady. "For phones, for rides, for people like me who've been isolated. No one should be alone like that." Rosa's eyes softened, and she gave Elaine a small, approving nod. "That's the Elaine I've always known." As they finished the paperwork, The finality of it settled over Elaine. The weight of her choices, the power of the decisions she had made, felt heavy but in a way that was liberating. The future was no longer something to fear. It was something she controlled. Later that evening, as she stood in front of the mirror, her reflection looked different. It wasn't just the new strength in her posture or the confidence in her eyes, it was the peace that had settled into her bones. She had taken everything back, and as she turned to leave the bathroom, a sound from the front door froze her in place. A knock, quiet but persistent. Elaine's heart skipped. She had expected this. They weren't done with her, not yet. She walked to the door, steadying her breath. This wasn't over, not yet. But she was ready. She opened it, and there stood Mia, quiet, uncertain, but with a strength of her own now. She held out a hand, tentative but firm. "I'm sorry, Grandma," Mia said, her voice soft but steady. "I was wrong, and I'm here to help." Elaine's heart swelled. For the first time in a long while, the world felt right again. She wasn't alone, and she wasn't backing down. Elaine stood at the edge of the living room, her gaze steady as she watched Kevin and Brooke enter. The tension in the air was thick enough to cut with a knife, but she refused to let it rattle her. Jordan was seated across from her, his calm presence like an anchor. Officer Harris stood nearby, his arms crossed, observing the interaction with quiet authority. It wasn't just a meeting anymore, it was a reckoning. Kevin's eyes flicked toward her, a mixture of frustration and something more, a weariness she hadn't seen before. His usual air of control had faltered. He had always assumed he could manipulate, pressure, and push until she folded. But Elaine had finally stopped bending. And it wasn't just because of the protective order. It was the quiet strength she had built over the last few months, the clear-headed decisions she had made, and the knowledge that this time, she wasn't alone. "I'm only trying to protect you, Mom." Kevin's voice was low, pleading, though his tone remained sharp. "You're not thinking clearly. You don't know what's best for you." Elaine didn't flinch. She'd heard this before, over and over, wrapped in the guise of care and concern. She wasn't buying it anymore. She turned her gaze to him, her voice calm, but with an edge that felt sharper than she intended. "From what, Kevin? From friendship? From people who care about me?" His jaw tightened, but he didn't answer. Instead, he glanced at Brooke, as if seeking her approval. Brooke, who had been silent until now, shifted uncomfortably. Her usual bravado had faltered. She knew the game was changing, but she still wasn't ready to admit defeat. "You're making a mistake, Elaine," Brooke said, her voice tight with emotion. "You've been influenced by Rosa, by Jordan, by everyone except us. We're family. We're the ones who care." Elaine shook her head, her gaze steady on them both. "Family doesn't control people. Family doesn't isolate people. I'm done being a pawn in your game." There was a long silence before Jordan spoke, his voice firm. "The fact that you're still trying to control her finances, her decisions, proves everything we've said. This isn't love. This is coercion." Elaine felt a cold ripple of satisfaction. It was finally out in the open. The truth couldn't be buried anymore. Later that day, Elaine's phone buzzed. It was a text from Mia. "Mom's crying, asking me to side with her. She's desperate. I don't know what to do." Elaine's stomach turned. She had hoped Mia wouldn't be caught in the middle of this anymore. But she also knew Mia was strong enough to choose her own path. "You don't have to do anything, Mia," Elaine replied, her fingers steady as she typed. "You don't owe her anything. Do what feels right for you. I'm proud of you, no matter what." She sat back, her breath steady as she waited for Mia's reply. She'd done everything she could to protect Mia from the same manipulation, but at the end of the day, it was up to Mia to choose her own path. Elaine had chosen hers. The days passed, and APS continued its monitoring, their interviews with Kevin and Brooke serving as another stark reminder of the distance between their reality and Elaine's. The warnings about further manipulation were clear. They could push, they could plead, but it was no longer a game they could win. Jordan had filed the necessary paperwork, and Elaine had offered Kevin and Brooke a path forward. "If you want to fix this," she told them, her voice cool, measured, "you'll go to therapy. You'll take responsibility. No money, no shortcuts, no manipulation. It's about accountability, not control. Elaine saw the frustration in Kevin's eyes, the realization that the rules had changed for good. He wasn't used to her setting the terms. In a final, defeated gesture, Kevin turned to leave. His shoulders slumped, the fight gone from his posture. As he reached the door, he stopped, turning to face Elaine one last time. His voice was low, almost a whisper. "Do you really think this is the best way, Mom? Cutting us out completely?" His voice cracked with something between anger and regret. Elaine looked at him, her gaze steady and unwavering. "It's the only way I'll be free." Kevin didn't respond. He left, the door closing softly behind him. Brooke lingered for a moment, but when she saw the finality in Elaine's expression, she followed him out. Elaine stood in the quiet aftermath, her heart beating strong. The weight of everything she had endured, everything she had overcome, pressed down on her. But it wasn't a burden anymore. It was a shield. And for the first time, she truly knew that she had taken her life back. Mia's reply came hours later. "I'm choosing to stand with you, Grandma. I'm sorry, I love you." Elaine held the phone to her chest, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. This was the start of something new, something stronger, something real. And as the night settled around her, Elaine knew she was no longer just surviving. She was living. Elaine arrived at the senior center, the familiar hum of activity greeting her as she stepped inside. The air smelled like coffee and paper, comforting, grounding. It was bingo night, a tradition she had kept for years, where the stakes were small, but the company was rich with stories, laughter, and the occasional friendly rivalry. It was a night she looked forward to, the one place where she knew she was more than just a person to be managed. As she walked in, she was greeted with warm smiles from people who had never once tried to control her, never tried to isolate her. They were there to play, to enjoy each other's company, not to take anything away. Elaine's heart lightened. These were the people who had stood by her, seen her for who she was, and accepted her unconditionally. She took a seat at the long table where her friends were already gathering, the shuffle of bingo cards and the clatter of markers a familiar rhythm. For the first time in what felt like months, Elaine felt safe. She didn't need to watch her back here, didn't need to be on alert. She was surrounded by people who were there because they cared, not because they wanted something from her. The game began, and Elaine joined in, her focus sharp, the lightness of the room making her feel like herself again. She kept her prepaid phone in her purse, not because she was afraid, but because she had learned to be wise. The small, discreet device was a lifeline, her backup, her protection. She wasn't going to let herself be isolated again. As the night wore on, Jordan sent a message confirming that her accounts, directives, and trust were secure. Everything had been updated. Alerts were in place, code words set for any changes, and her financial freedom was no longer in the hands of people who had tried to control her. She didn't have to fight for it anymore. It was locked in, protected by law and by the people who truly cared about her. Elaine's smile was genuine, but a weight she hadn't realized was there finally lifted. Kevin and Brooke were fading into the distance. Their influence had been replaced by boundaries, by oversight. The life she had rebuilt was no longer under their thumb. Just as the game wrapped up and her friends began to disperse, Elaine heard a familiar voice behind her. "Mia!" Elaine's heart skipped as her granddaughter walked toward her, her face glowing with the kind of quiet pride that made Elaine's chest swell. "Grandma," Mia said softly, sitting beside her. "I wanted to talk to you about college. I've been looking at some options, but I need help with the application process. I don't know where to start." Elaine's heart softened. She had known this day would come, the day Mia would need guidance, the day she would be ready to step into the world, to find her place. And this time, Elaine wasn't just handing over advice. She was handing over security, a protected future. "I've set up a fund for you, Mia," Elaine said, her voice steady. "A housing and education fund that'll be there when you need it. It's yours. No one can touch it. Not your mom, not anyone." Mia's eyes filled with gratitude, the weight of everything that had passed between them lifting. "Thank you, Grandma. I don't know what to say." Elaine smiled, reaching over to squeeze her hand. Just keep being you, Mia. You're already doing more than enough. As they left the senior center, Elaine felt a deep sense of peace. The night air was crisp, the stars twinkling overhead, and she walked with a sense of steadiness she hadn't had in a long time. Her house, her life, her decisions, all of them were hers now. She wasn't alone in this world, and she certainly wasn't at the mercy of those who had tried to control her. When she arrived home, she locked the door behind her, the sound of the bolt sliding into place a familiar comfort. She sat down, exhausted but at peace, the weight of the day slowly sinking into her bones. The phone, a lifeline and a shield, sat quietly beside her on the table. The phone rang. Elaine picked it up, expecting a call from one of her friends. But when she saw the name on the screen, her heart stuttered. It was a restricted number. She hesitated for only a moment before answering. "Elaine!" A voice came through, strained and desperate. It was Kevin. "You've gone too far," he said, his voice tight. "You called the police on your own kids. You think this is the answer? You've ruined everything." Elaine's breath steadied. She wasn't afraid anymore. She wasn't a victim. "You took my phone like I was 12, Kevin," she replied, her voice calm but firm. "And you tried to take everything else. This is the answer. And the next call, you'll hear, is from the police." There was a long silence, and then the sound of the line disconnecting. Elaine sat back in her chair, her heart still calm. Kevin and Brooke had made one last attempt, but the truth had already been laid bare. They had lost. She had won. Elaine smiled, a quiet victory that was more about her freedom than anything else. She heard the faint buzz of her backup phone in the other room. This time, it wasn't an emergency, it was a call she had waited years to receive. It was a call from friends, not gatekeepers.